That was quite the intro. So I'm going to start with some questions. This is going to be an interactive session. You have to contribute. I'll make you get up and down even, so just prepare yourselves. But who knows what this number is? Who knows what it means? You got to shout it out loudly. I heard it. Singles Day. All right. Who knows how much money was made on Singles Day this year? Shout out a guess. 50 billion? Not that much. 20 billion? Very close. 25 billion. It took 7 minutes to make $1 billion at the start of the day. How much of the purchases do you think were on mobile? What percent? 60, 80, 50? 90% of purchases on Singles Day were made on mobile. And if you compare that to Cyber Monday, which just happened, Cyber Monday, doesn't even compare to this. Cyber Monday was about 6.6 billion, and about 64, 65% of sessions overall were on mobile, and about 45% of purchases. So China, a different deal, but still I think proves the point of why I'm here, why I actually put it in the title. We're here to talk about the mobile web. And so I'm a mobile UX manager, which you guys heard in the intro, but I don't work for a product team. What I do is I actually work with companies, top growth, also kind of like high priority companies to help them transform their mobile experience. So a lot of times this is figuring out what their challenges are. I work with companies of all different types. So e-commerce is what I do a lot of, but also finance, B2B, services, basically anyone who is trying to grow their business on the web. I've worked with probably all of them. I work with about 100 different companies a year. So I see lots of sites. I see lots of the same challenges that people go through, and also a lot of the same fixes and best practices have kind of emerged throughout this time. And so what I want to talk about today is why you guys should be prioritizing the mobile web, or at least thinking about it. And then I'm going to give some really actionable steps across our two pillars, which are speed and design. So hopefully you can actually, if you have a business, if you're thinking of a business, pull out your site during that time and actually go through it with me. You're allowed to have your phone out during this presentation. It's about mobile. And then in the end, if we have some time, I want to talk about the future of the mobile web and some of the awesome stuff that Google is doing. A lot of it's open sourced to improve the mobile web in general. So before we kind of jump into it, a lot of questions that I get, and I think I've gotten it from a lot of the startups I've worked with here, are, what about apps? I'm making an app. And I always say, why are you making an app? They say, well, all the time is spent in apps, which is true. We spend about 5 hours a day on our phones, which is kind of crazy. If you think about it, usually 3.5 hours, this is for the US, are spent in apps. Spain also has a pretty equal smartphone penetration rate to the United States, actually. But 3 of apps control 80% of that time, which is Facebook, Instagram, and whatever your messaging platform is, typically your email. So actually, a lot of where commerce happens, a lot of where research happens, and finding your business, especially if you're a new business, you're a startup, a lot of that is actually going to happen on the mobile web. And so 60% of Google's overall traffic is on mobile. And I think historically why my team was founded is because people are really used to designing for desktop, and responsive web design came around, and we're squishing everything down onto a mobile device. And that's kind of how we've been thinking about it. But now that all of this traffic is mobile, this is Spain's graph as well, about 45%, we have to start thinking in a new mindset about mobile user experience. People actually enjoy, if you're e-commerce, shopping on mobile, as compared to apps. But we hear a lot of these challenges, which is, my bounce rate is really high on mobile. Or mobile doesn't convert like desktop does for me. Conversion rate's around 30, 40% actually of what it is on desktop. But the thing that we have to keep in mind is user behavior. So mobile user behavior is actually very different. We're very action-oriented on mobile, we tend to use our phones in smaller, chunked up pieces to find information versus a lot of that browsing, exploring, endless scrolling, and then you're lost 2 hours later and you come out of your black hole. But a lot of that is done in smaller chunks. A lot of that movement is still cross-device. So we have to think of mobile differently than we think of desktop. And hopefully you guys came to Evie's talk yesterday about measuring all the right things. And so we want to consider that as well. So we know that engagement is lower, but the web really does offer a broader reach, especially for new companies, new businesses. A lot of times where people are going to find you and be driven to is actually on the web. So hopefully, if anything today I convince you, you shouldn't be thinking only of mobile as apps. You shouldn't be thinking of it only as web, but think about the use cases for each in a holistic strategy for mobile that's really just mobile specific. And so the first thing I want to talk about is speed. And we think of this as the first pillar of mobile experience. And the reason is because you can have the most beautifully designed site in the entire world, and if it doesn't load, no one is ever going to see it. So we kind of think this is the initial one. So I want to do one more exercise. People in the beanbags look comfortable, so you can stay seated, like put your hand up. But everyone else stand up really quickly. Get your bodies moving. I know it's late. Stand up. Okay, so we're going to do one more exercise. All right, so sit down when you would leave this site. It's a travel site. You're trying to read an article. Put your hands up if you're in the front row. Still loading. Oh, we got some. We got screen. Yeah. For those in the front, there's not many people left. Oh, logo. Oh, we got some font. There's an image, kind of. Oh, we got cookies. Okay, yeah, there's no one left standing. I wouldn't be either. So this is a total pain, right? This used to be CNN's website on a 3G network, and that's terrible. It took almost 45 seconds for this page to load, actually, and this is on a mobile device simulated. No one would be left standing at that point. And so this is something that we've realized over the last couple of years is that speed is really important. We did a study and found that about half of people will actually leave if your site takes over 3 seconds to load, which is a pretty low barrier to entry. And the other thing is if you're a new brand, if you're a new company, this is really considered in kind of your brand image. 1 in 5 people who get annoyed with speed will actually never return. And so this is a really big deal. There's also this study that proves that this kind of matters to the key metrics that you guys care about. So this is a graph that was done by an analytics company called Soasta. They took a group of sites and actually throttled them. And so you can see this is actually the impact on conversion rate. So I think the interesting thing here is from 10 seconds to 6 seconds, not much improvement. People are still bouncing. They're not sticking around. But where you get these really big gains is going from something like 5, 6 seconds to 2 to 3 seconds. Huge increases in conversion rate. People are staying. They're enjoying their experience. They're moving between pages a lot easier. And so, again, I want to side note that this is on 3G. And we recommend really testing and optimizing for 3G because in the US, in Spain, it's still the national average, actually, for connection speed. 4G is really increasing, but our kind of take on it is that you should be optimizing for your bottom line. And then everyone who comes to your site has a really great experience. And we'll talk a bit about the metrics to optimize towards in a second. But same thing for bounce rate, this kind of conversion. And this is really, really important. And we've seen that companies that work on this are really seeing gains. We get a lot of questions on what happens on the left. On 3G, if you're loading in like 1 or 2 seconds, it's probably a 404 page, so as a caveat there. But the key takeaway is that page speed, at the end of the day, your load times are revenue that is potentially being lost. And so tools that matter that you can use to fix this, how many people in the room are, just to actually show of hands really quickly, are developers? How many people are product managers? Designers? Okay. CEOs, business people. Okay, we've got like a healthy mix of everyone. So a lot of these, I would say the simplest is PageSpeed Insights. It's a Google tool. It looks at best practices when it comes to performance. I would say this is your first stop in putting together a list of potential suggestions to share with your developers and work on. The other two, I would say webpagetest.org is the one that I spend the most of my time in. It's actually an external tool, and you can go and put in any URL, your competitor's URL, any page you want, and you can test it on different devices and different networks. It simulates it, puts out a ton of stats that you can use, metrics, waterfalls, all that fun stuff. If you're a developer, it's fun. And it's really useful. It creates videos even. You saw that video before was created with Web Page Test. And the other tool is Chrome Developer Tools. If you go to the Audits tab, there's a new tool called Lighthouse that is developer-focused, brand new, actually was just launched a couple months ago. So I would also recommend checking that one out as well. But we get a lot of questions when I'm using these tools. What should I aim for? What's kind of best in class? And we see that the metrics that matter the most, when I work with companies, this is what I tell them to aim for. So speed index might not be something that you guys have heard of. It's a metric from Web Page Test. And what it is it's the measure of the load of the above the fold content. And why focus on the above the fold is because we see that that most highly correlates to user experience. So stuff can be loading below the fold. There can be JavaScript executing in the background. But as long as the user sees and kind of feels that there's content loading in, that's what they really care about. Where you get into issues is where you have that 10, 15 seconds of blank white space. And that's where you really get bounce rate escalating. So speed index is a really good measure. And trying to get that from 3 to 5 seconds, again on a 3G network. The other two are kind of secondary metrics that I talk about. And I always like to use the analogy of moving into an apartment. So if you're moving into a new apartment, you've loaded up all your boxes, would you rather carry a ton of really heavy boxes up the stairs to your apartment, or would you rather carry super light ones? So trying to keep pages as light as possible, page weight around 1 megabyte. That can be tough if you have a lot of images. There are ways to do it, like lazy loading, but being really conscious of the page weight and the weight of all of the JavaScript CSS that you have on the page. And the last one is total requests. So this is the amount of stuff. And again, would you rather have fewer boxes that you have to take up the stairs, or would you rather be taking tons of tiny boxes up the stairs? Probably not, a lot of wasted effort. So trying to keep your requests around 80. So there's one way to go about this, which is just trying to optimize towards this. And we see a lot of the same common issues that I work with on sites. A lot of times it's just maintenance. Someone hasn't paid attention. Your developers are working on getting product features out the door, and performance has slipped. So a lot of the main issues that we see, and I would say are the low-hanging fruit, images, compressing them. A lot of times we have someone who has a desktop site, that's what they've designed for. Marketing puts a 2 megabyte retina image on the desktop site, and you're loading it in on mobile. That takes about 10, 15 seconds. Typically, the ideal size is about 50 to 100 kilobytes for mobile images. And there's ways to do that. You can either just compress, or there's lots of responsive image techniques, source set. So looking into that. Compression is just a big theme, so remembering to gzip, minify everything, and also cache everything so you're not loading stuff up between pages. And then the last two, I think, take more developer resources, more time and thought, thinking through reducing JavaScript usage and making sure it's not render blocking. Render blocking is where you see that big white space, where basically what's happening is you're going to get a bunch of files, you have to load all of those up before you can load any actual content in, like images, like fonts, things like that, and making sure you're prioritizing above the fold. I'm not going to go too into the details. There's lots of resources on Google Developers Hub on ways to fix this, but I would say these are some of the most common ones to look out for when after this you go back with your team, you run things through tools, and you find some of this and put together a plan. And so this is actually what this ends up looking like. This is a company I worked with on their site speed. So this one over here is the one after about 2 months of working in optimization, so that one was done in about 8-ish seconds. Big improvement, right? And so this was right before the holidays. They were really freaking out about, we want to make sure to maximize our holiday revenue, and they saw 38% more revenue year on year and 7% more mobile sessions. And 100% of their pages now load under 5 seconds on a 3G network. So again, this is real dollars in the door. The other way to go about optimizing, if you don't want to go through the process of necessarily fixing all of these things, you have some heavy frameworks that are legacy, I want to really quickly talk about the AMP project. AMP means Accelerated Mobile Pages. It was an open source project that was started at Google, but is basically performance by design. So the AMP framework in itself is super performant. If you build on it, you are likely to have a very fast page. And it's made up of AMP-specific HTML, JavaScript, and there's lots of limitations, like you can't have third-party JavaScript. You have to use AMP components. You can't have more than 50 kilobytes of CSS. So there's some restrictions that are put in place because they kind of are best practices. And this ends up being real performance because the one factor that everyone gets really jazzed about is that you can actually serve from the Google cache if you have an AMP page for both organic and for ads. And so on average, pages end up loading in on average about half a second because you can actually serve your pages from our server. And so on average, they're 50% less bandwidth and 10 times less data. And so originally this started as a publisher solution, but has really expanded to e-commerce, to finance. We have lead gen pages. Tons of people are publishing pages in AMP, and they're performing really well. So again, this is what this ends up looking like. So AMP from cache, almost instant. The AMP page not from cache is still much faster. And this was the original landing page. And so a lot of times, the thing I like to point out here too is that you don't lose design parity. They're actually able to keep the same layout. It's just much faster. So we've launched this with a couple of people. Actually, we have tens of millions of AMP pages now. This was a French retailer, Greenwies, and they saw 5x improvement in their mobile page speed, 80% increase in conversion rates, and 66% decrease in their AdWords CPA. And this page looks just like the old one used to. And so if anything I ask of you today, for your startups, for your websites, companies, go back to your team and go find your top URL, your homepage even, and use some of these tools and put together a plan with your team across dev, across marketing that says, how are we going to tackle this problem? What are the goals that we want to hit with some of these metrics? And how long is it going to take? And then do some estimates of what you think the potential uplift could be, because likely performance isn't being prioritized. And it's really easy. There's lots of tools out there, and most of these fixes can be done within a day. We have these events called hackathons where we bring lots of companies to Google. We bring developer teams. They sit for a day. We answer questions, but most of the time, it's just them working for a full day. And at the end, they actually present what they're able to do, only on mobile performance. And on average, companies can decrease their page load speed 40 to 60% in a single day. So it's a lot of times just taking the time to sit down and get through it. So your page is super fast, you're running, you're on the way there, and this is what happens. Yeah, friction. That does not look enjoyable. She was so close, too. But this is what bad design is like, bad UX. So who's going to pick this one over here? If you had to pick between one site to put your information in. They're the same information. If anyone's going to pick that one, you should leave, probably. Yeah. So beautiful design is a competitive advantage. It doesn't take a lot to be thoughtful about design, but a lot of times there's small things in mobile user experience that get overlooked. A lot of what we focus on is identifying those and prioritizing. And hopefully you've heard of Google's 25 principles of mobile site design. They're great basics in understanding what all good sites have in common. But there's a lot of other things I think that we see on a daily basis that I wanted to go through with you guys that are quick fixes that are constantly overlooked. And I'm going to focus on lower down the conversion funnel because it tends to be similar across companies versus a homepage. Different landing pages might have a lot more different designs. So I wanted to focus on some of the overarching principles. And so the three most important things of a homepage or a landing page are a clear call to action. So what am I supposed to do if I'm a user? And can I see it? Is it contrasted? Is it bold? A clear value proposition, and then some visuals of your products or service. Value proposition is one of the things most commonly overlooked and easiest to fix. We do a lot of value proposition workshops on why should someone pick you? Why should you be chosen over the next competitor, the next ad, or organic listing down the list? And the thing I really like about this Credible example is it's specific to mobile. So their value proposition, instant and accurate results, jargon-free explanation, always free. 3 really easy bullets. On mobile, people actually don't really read. We just skim. We look for headlines, bullets, and a lot of times people will take their homepage, which has instead 3 paragraphs explaining these things, and then just shrink it down and put it on mobile. And you really want to think about mobile first. How is someone going to consume this content and get my value prop and really sell them at a first glance or two with a couple lines? The other thing to point out is visuals don't always have to be actual visuals. It's pretty easy in e-commerce, but icons, something that tells you that you're in the right place. A lot of times, value propositions for e-commerce are going to be something like free shipping is the one that's looked for the most, or something even related to shipping. Call to action, a lot of times is search, might be shop now. This really varies, but making sure it's benefit-oriented and that you're really guiding the user. Oh, fun animation. So conversion is the other section I really want to talk about, and form optimization after that. But really thinking about, okay, so someone has been sold on your product or service. How do you make it as easy as possible for them to convert? The thing that we talk to people about a lot is thinking about cross-device. Again, this goes back to, mobile doesn't convert as well for me. Well, mobile is not being used in the same way. People are doing research. They're thinking about it, and if you're not there, they're probably not going to come back later. But there's a lot of ways through user experience and through design you can make that process easier. So I might be in line for the grocery store, researching, getting a mortgage, but I'm not necessarily going to fill out a 30-field form while I'm in line at the grocery store. But there's easy ways to either maybe I started and I can save and return later, or I can email myself information, and that reminds me to come back later on. I have a reminder in my email, and I can come back on desktop, or even calling if you have customer service. A lot of times if you're on the go, someone's not necessarily going to fill out a massive form when they can call and get the answers or submit the information that way. Limiting exit points. This actually goes back to a really interesting psychological principle called the rule of noise, which is basically the closer you get to completing an action, the less distraction you want. So you'll notice a lot of times you can search and there'll be lots of icons in the menu and menus and ways to navigate. And then once you go into a form or you go to checkout, all that stuff disappears. So the only things here, you can get back to the home page or maybe the home page in the cart. And this just helps people focus. They have less places to go, options as they get closer to this part. And I've done this with a couple e-commerce companies. One, it increased sales like 26%, which is crazy. So it really depends, but this can be a really impactful one. Using pagination. This just guides the user and gives them an understanding of how many steps might be left in this process. If I go, say I'm Geico and I didn't have this and I got all the way to 7 and there was no guide, I was like, geez, this form is so long, and I left. And I was doing all of this on mobile. It's because I didn't know I was almost all of the way there. So these can be really helpful in just helping the user understand what information, how much information is going to be needed, guiding them through that process. Sometimes, even if you have 2 steps, it could be step 1 of 2, step 2 of 2. It doesn't necessarily have to be this, but it also makes it feel like you're checking off some type of task as you go through. This is more specific to retail, but in e-commerce, but allowing for checkout as guest. Signing in, we'll talk more about this later, is a pain. which one did I use? Was it email? Was it social? Did I sign up for an account before? What's my password? I'm confused. That is a really painful process that, especially if someone's trying to buy something quickly on mobile, which is usually the case, just adding guest checkout and prompting them to enter a password later really helps kind of make that flow more seamless. And the last thing is form optimization in the UX. So I spend an odd amount of my time talking about forms, which seem really small, but are really important down the line. And so making this as painless as possible. This one goes back to, again, guiding, but using descriptive CTAs, next, continue, and submit are very bland. But if you said continue to delivery, that primes me for what information I have to enter next. And so it doesn't necessarily always feel as cumbersome. Reducing the number of fields. So a lot of times we say, is it necessary? So you might have 20 optional fields. That makes it feel a lot worse than it is. So some ideas, getting rid of all the optional ones. Consider combining the first and last name. We've actually seen some studies that also can be more culturally sensitive for people who have multiple names. The Google Places API, if you need to address personal verification, checkout, and shipping, the Google Places API actually leverages maps information. So you start typing in your address, you see this little drop-down pops up, and then I can basically just select whichever one, and it autofills all of the rest of the fields. So instead of filling out 5, 6 fields, you're filling out 1, and it's validated. And then the last one, e-commerce specific, is having billing as shipping checked by default. Most people have the same. That takes an entire chunk and just collapses it in. So those are just some ideas, but think carefully about the data that you actually need from people, whether it's useful or cumbersome. Inline validation and autofill. I don't know how many of you have filled out 30 fields, gone to the bottom, press submit, you're put back at the top, and it has 15 things that you need to correct that you mistyped the first time because you're on mobile. So someone said story of my life. So using inline validation, which is as you go, basically if you enter something wrong, it says, hey, you've done this wrong. This is ASOS. And I like that they do it. We need your first name. It's nicer that way. So there's funny ways that you can kind of incorporate some of your brand identity into this. But it just makes it so much easier and so much less painful down the line. And the other one is just using autofill. So autofill is fantastic. Most people have information saved to their browser. I think the stat was on average, people who use autofill fill out forms 30% more than those who don't. So easy win right there is just making sure autofill is enabled on your phone or on your forms. Drop-downs. Drop-downs are the worst. No one likes drop-downs, especially if there's 2 options. I would say even less than 4, using buttons like this rather than a list of things that people have to sort through. So this was Mango. This was actually a before and after that someone on my team worked with them on. And so you can see up here, it used to say home delivery free, and there was 2 options that you would get if you clicked on that. This one, I get an overview off the bat, so I don't mistakenly miss anything, and I can just select it and continue. Much easier, 1 less tap. Don't use drop-downs, they're the worst. And this is the easiest one. I saved this for last. The number of forms that I get to where I'm entering a zip code and it asks me for an alphabetical keyboard, it's just a pain. This one, it'll pop up. But you do just have to go fix 1 line of code. So that's the easiest, especially if you're getting information like zip, phone, credit card info. And so the takeaway here, hopefully you guys found some good ideas, maybe some things you forgot about or didn't think about, have tested. And I always like to end with the fact I really recommend A/B testing as much as possible. These are best practices. I think most of these are pretty standard, especially for mobile. But A/B testing is the way to figure out how your users behave. And so if you don't use A/B testing right now, I'd really recommend trying to find one. Google has one, Google Optimize. It just relaunched. It's free. It integrates really easily with Google Analytics and AdWords. So hopefully you found some ideas in all of this to take away and take back and start testing. for higher conversion rates. And so the last thing I want to do is spend some time talking about the future of the mobile web. Google's really focusing on this. Obviously, it's a lot of our traffic. And there's some really cool new web technologies that are out there. I think you guys as startups are in a wonderful place to take advantage of a lot of this, because a lot of times you're building from the ground up, right? You don't have tons of legacy architecture to deal with. You don't have really large organizations where you need 15 rounds of approvals to change one thing. That's sometimes the pitfall of the companies that we work with. A lot of the companies I've seen here are moving fast. They're making decisions quickly, which is really awesome. So think about some of this, especially if you're in the early stages of thinking, should I do app, web? What type of functionality do I want to include? And again, going back to kind of where we started, apps are super engaging, but it's hard to get someone to download it, and it's hard to make sure that they're really engaged. So maybe someone downloads an app, they open it once, and they never come back. Or maybe they're using it once a month, and could you have that same functionality on the web where it's easily discoverable? And mobile web has all this reach, but how do we make it more engaging? How do we make the web feel more like an app, where I can go back to a website and I have a personal experience. I'm auto-logged in. Or it's really easy to convert. I can do some cool functionality that might not have been available in the past. So the first thing, imagine a world where you don't have to sign in. We talked about how annoying sign-in is. So Google One-Tap Sign-Up actually just launched about a month ago. Brand new. And what this does, you can kind of see this GIF over here, is you can create an account or sign in actually with one tap. So what this does is if you're on a Google platform, say I have Gmail on my phone or I'm logged into Chrome, then it recognizes that I'm an active user, so I have to have been active in the last 24 hours. And it basically pops up and says, hey, Claire, create an account. Just tap right here. And you just tap, it tokenizes it, sends it to your system, and they have an account created. It also auto-signs in returning users. And the cool thing is it's also cross-browser. So if I'm on Chrome on my phone and I log into Zillow because I'm searching for a house, I favorite some stuff, think about stuff to look at later, I go back on desktop and I'm actually already logged in, even if I haven't been to Zillow in the last month. So if you want to check out more of this, developers.google.com/identity. Really awesome stuff here. Kind of goes with the login with Google button as well. But WeGo, travel company, they did this. So you can see, here's mine right here. This is the first time I had ever been there. I was asked to just create an account by tapping on whichever profile I wanted. Easy as that. They saw a 10x increase in account creation since launching this. AliExpress, they had a really big problem with sign-in failures, which is really expensive. You have to send emails, reset passwords. It's a whole system. They saw an 85% decrease in sign-in failures, which is huge. And then PetLove, their pets e-commerce. So one-tap auto sign-in or auto account creation, they saw 2 times more users go to checkout already signed in. So they didn't have to go through the part of picking guest checkout, creating their account. They could already access all of their information if they had checked in before. So this is all live, totally available, so definitely check that stuff out. The next one, imagine a world without forms. This is my ideal. No more forms. Wouldn't have to talk about form optimization. But this is, I think, really exciting, especially in the world of e-commerce. Not only just retail, but travel, even taking payments for example, New York Times or Wall Street Journal, whatever publications, if you take payments on the web. What this is, it's an API that actually creates an overlay for payments. So it leverages autofill in your Google account to understand what payments you have saved. And it's not only Google payments. So it's not just Pay with Google. It's not Apple or Android Pay, PayPal. Any payment can actually be done through this API. It's W3C standard. And basically, you can kind of see right here, actually, this is the full flow. So if I wanted to check out, or if I was in a guest checkout, if I had this API on my site, what it would do is it would pop this up. You can set the shipping options that you want. It already has it filled in, but I can change them. Basically, all of my addresses that I have saved, all of the payment methods I have saved, I just select which one, I click pay, and you're done. So it actually, I don't have to go through whoever's checkout flow. I don't have to fill out all this extra stuff. All that gets sent to you guys for emails, personal, the info in the account, and continue on my day, which is really great. And so it's an API, it's supposed to support all global forms of payment. So really, we kind of see this as the tubing to bring payments online and make it mobile first and mobile friendly. But it does work across devices. And so J.Crew launched this last month, and they're seeing 75% faster checkout time. So less time spent from cart to order completion. And then the last one I want to talk about is imagine if your website just was acting like an app, which is a weird concept to get a hold of. But what does this mean? Imagine if it was fast, so if it booted up immediately in 2 seconds, interactive in 3. If it was integrated, so you could add to home screen and launch full screen like an app, but it's actually being powered by the web. Also, you could launch if you're on Android from App Launcher, as an example. Reliable, so what if you were available to have a site work offline? So a lot of times apps, if you're buying something or researching, whatever, if you're offline, you go back online, all of that information gets sent off. Right now, if you're on Chrome, you get the offlineosaurus, the dinosaur that's like, it doesn't work right now. But this fixes that. And then the last part is engaging. So if you had an app that could send push notifications that access features like camera or media within the actual device, a lot of this hasn't been possible on the web until recently. So what makes all this possible is called progressive web apps. That's a branded name, a lot of people say PWA, for a web app that basically acts like an app. It takes the best of web technologies and app functionality. And the way that this works is through what's called a service worker API. This gets super technical. I'm going to give you the high level, and that typically this is how kind of sites work. They go to a server, they fetch the information, comes back. What the service worker API does is it is a client-side proxy that basically gets installed on the device, JavaScript, and then allows you to access local storage. So basically the browser can run in the background and continue to complete actions that allow for things like offline and web push notifications. Really technical. Go to Google developers if you're interested in learning more about this. It works differently with different frameworks, but really fantastic kind of technology that has opened up the web to doing a lot more. So I wanted to show you guys some examples of people who are leveraging this and what it actually looks like, because it's kind of hard to conceptualize from a technical perspective. This is Starbucks. This is actually their new progressive web app. They actually have an app too, but I only go to Starbucks when I'm traveling. So this is their app. You can actually add it to home screen. You're seeing in the GIF over here. It opens full screen. You're auto signed in. You can actually order ahead, and then it gives you like a little barcode that you can just scan when you get to the store, saying that you've already paid. Mercado Libre. They are an e-commerce platform. You can also ask questions about products. And so this over here, I don't know how easy it is to see. It basically says, find out when you have an answer. I want to receive notifications, maybe another time. And so if you opt into notifications, basically this over here says, someone has answered your question, come back, and it'll open the web page again. So again, they don't have an app downloaded, but you can send push notifications, and they saw 41% of people actually opted in, which is pretty high. Instagram actually is a PWA now. So this was really done for emerging markets. Maybe if you don't have space on your phone to actually download an app or consistently keep it there, you can access your camera through the web. It does background sync, and it does push notifications. So if someone likes my photo, I get a notification. I don't even have to have the app downloaded. Uber, same thing. It really works well. It's interactive in 3 seconds on a 2G network, and is a total of 50 kilobytes for their app, which again, for emerging markets, when they don't have tons of space or really great connections, this is really important. And the last one I want to go through is Trivago, big travel company as well. And so they saw 67, basically they have a lot of people who you can imagine when you're traveling might lose service, get bad connection, you're running through, I don't know, the middle of nowhere, or you're driving and you're trying to book your next hotel. So they did offline mode and saw 67% of users who were interrupted by a period of offline actually came back afterwards. And they saw an increase of 97% in terms of conversions. So it's pretty huge overall. And so this was 2 years ago. Flipkart, they're a company in India, launched the first PWA for Chrome Developer Summit. This is the landscape today. So most pretty large companies are either have one or are developing and testing. And again, you guys are in the position, I think, as startups, if you don't have tons of infrastructure, to think about how you can leverage this type of technology. A lot of times it takes quite a while if you have a lot of legacy stuff you're trying to incorporate. But if you're building from the ground up, I think this is truly the future of how the web is going to evolve and become really engaging. Oh yeah, and other people think this too. So by 2020, Gartner thinks that progressive web apps will replace about 50% of consumer-facing apps. So some final thoughts. I've been talking at you guys for a while. But put your users first. A lot of them are mobile-first users, and they're going to continue to be. Make sure your site is fast. Make a great first impression. Think really carefully about your user experience and the pain points that your users are facing. And then make sure you're planning for the future. So if you go away from today, go back to your team, like, mobile, what are we doing? Now I would say start with performance. It's kind of the first pillar. Think about your conversion funnel. Use data to identify pain points. Maybe next quarter, you're interested in testing AMP, so start with your top landing page and make an AMP copy and see how it performs, if it's worth rolling out on a wider basis. If you're thinking about re-architecting, or maybe you haven't even started yet in your first building, check out PWAs. The developer community is also fantastic. If you have questions, there is GitHub. There is a complete forums set where there's tons of questions and very active community members. You can get lots of Google engineers that will answer you if you have any questions there. And I mean, next year, I've showed you some of the cool stuff that's happening, but who knows? Whatever the next technology is, I'm sure it will be improving the mobile web. So thank you, guys.